Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, An Estate Plan for the Earth, about how Catholic religious communities are making decisions to protect their land for the future. I'm Brian Roewe. I'm the environment correspondent for EarthBeat and National Catholic Reporter.
And I'm Chris Herlinger, the New York and international correspondent with Global Sisters Report. Brian and I spent part of the summer visiting some religious communities in the Hudson River Valley in New York and the Mississippi watershed in the Midwest, doing interviews for a series of articles called An Estate Plan for the Earth. The first article was published Monday in EarthBeat and Global Sisters Report, and the others will be published over the next few weeks. Our presenters today are from two of the congregations we visited, one in the Hudson Valley and one in the Midwest. They will talk about how their communities made decisions about using and conserving their land and offer some recommendations for other groups or individuals, religious or not, who might be considering doing something similar.
In just a moment, we'll introduce you to our presenters, but before we do, we have a couple of housekeeping announcements. So you may have noticed that you are on mute. Thank you for your patience with this. We do this to ensure that we can provide a solid listening experience for all of our participants. Also today during the session, you'll be invited to send questions to the presenters. You can do so by typing them in the chat room, and our behind the scenes team will get them to Chris and I. You can also use the chat to let us know if you're having any difficulties, and we'll try to help as best we can. We'd also love to hear your observations and reactions to the discussion, so you can share that in the chat as well. And I'll also take a moment to note at this point that we had more than 500 people register for today's event, and they were coming from 25 different countries. So welcome.
Today's schedule is a simple one. We will have a brief prayer, followed by some interview questions for our guests. Then we will ask our presenters the questions that you've submitted. We'll have a few closing announcements and prayer, and then we'll be finished. Within a week of the presentation, you will receive an email from us with a recording of today's session, along with a list of resources referenced during today's session.
Now, before I introduce our presenters today, Sister Verónica Méndez and Beth Piggush, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement as we are all on traditional territory. Here in Kansas City, I'm on the traditional territory of the Kaw, Kickapoo, and Osage nations. Chris, who is in Queens, New York, is on Munsee Lenape land. Beth, who is coming to us from just outside La Crosse, Wisconsin, is on Ho-Chunk, Winnebago Nation land. And Sister Verónica in Nyack, New York, is also on Lenape land. You're invited to make your own land acknowledgement in the chat, and you can find information on the ancestral roots of your particular place at native-land.ca. Again, that's native-land.ca. So, as I said, our two presenters today are Sister Verónica Méndez and Beth Piggush. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
And we're grateful to have you with us. So Beth is the Integral Ecology Director for the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration in La Crosse, Wisconsin. The sisters have been a major funder of EarthBeat and NCR's climate coverage. Beth has an evolving purpose that includes serving as a resource and promoting environmental and sustainability best practices that support care for all of God's creation. Two major parts of Beth's work are promoting the Global Laudato Si Action Platform, which you may have heard about, and overseeing sustainability efforts on the congregation's land on St. Joseph Bridge, which includes 200 acres of woodlands, prairies, and crops, which I visited earlier this summer for this reporting.
Sister Verónica Méndez of the Institute of Our Lady of Christian Doctrine was born in Santurce, Puerto Rico, and raised in New York City's Spanish Harlem. She holds a master's degree of theology in Hispanic ministry from the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, California, and has worked with her congregation in Florida, South Carolina, and New York, mainly in religious education. She's also been involved in national outreach to Spanish speakers in the U.S. Church and in vocation work for the Archdiocese of New York. Sister Verónica, who is celebrating 60 years, 60 years of religious life this year, directed the Marydale camp in Nyack, New York from 1981 to 1988. She served as president of her congregation from 2014 to 2018, leading the community as it made arrangements to conserve a portion of its property. And I would just want to say personally, it was a great pleasure to work with Sister Verónica on our project. It was delightful. Sister Verónica, may we ask you to lead us in a prayer, please?
Thank you for those kind words. The prayer I picked, our founder, Mother Marianne Gurney, based our spirituality on the incarnation. And we have a saying of her of what this means, which we love very much. And I feel it indicates the attitude that we religious communities need today as we make decisions on our land. And so the quote is, to pivot one's life on the incarnation will make us willingly settle for conclusions that are tentative, untidy, and always in the process of evolving. While it disturbs the rigid, it offers an exciting challenge to the flexible and warmly human. It is the only approach which can keep Christianity viable in a changing world. Lord, grant us the grace to pivot our life on the incarnation. Help us to settle for conclusions that are tentative, untidy, and always in the process of evolving. Let this spirit guide what we do with the gifts you have given us, especially the gift of our lands. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Verónica. That was fantastic.
Welcome.
So I'd like to just begin by asking both of you to briefly just tell us what led your community to take steps to conserve some portion of your land. What was the motivations? And Sister Verónica, why don't we start with you?
Okay. A big motive for us is that we are one of those communities in today's words that is coming to completion. Mine was never a huge community. So being small never bothered us. But around 2010, we said, you know, we really are getting very tiny. What are we going to do with all these gifts that we have? So that was a big push for us. The fact that we knew we would be going out of existence, and we felt it was very irresponsible not to plan and do something with this beautiful property and the other gifts that we have. So since 2011, we began to talk and pray about what was going to happen. It took our chapters and our assemblies, and each year a few more people died. So we knew we were on the right track. And happily in 2017, we were able to sign off with Trust for Public Land and protect our property. And we had a big celebration. We all felt great about it.
That's great. And Beth, what was the decision process like for that FSPA? What was kind of their prompting and motivation?
Sure, thank you for having me today. The land that FSPA is taking care of is one in which it was a farm originally purchased in 1895. So part of the reason in which the sisters wanted to protect it was cultural and historical. And with some discerning and reflection, they started the process in 2009 to really look at what it was that they had to do and what could be stemming from their Franciscan charism and values. So in 2013, they passed the first of 2 congregational proposals in which they said they wanted to permanently commit the land to educational purposes related to preservation and sustainability. Then in 2017, they made an even further commitment for making the land available for collaboration with an education focus, so others could learn about ecological integrity, restorative agriculture, soil rehabilitation, and sustainable woodland practices.
Let's pivot a bit to a related topic, which was kind of the nuts and bolts of the decision-making process. Sister Verónica, can you tell us a bit, what was the decision-making process like how did the congregation go about making the decision about the use of land?
Well, in 2010, we elected what would end up being our next to last president. And from about 2011 on, our chapters and our assemblies really took seriously what would happen here and how do we go about it. At the same time, I was in charge of Marydale Faith and Life Center, which is where we have our ministry that used to be a girls' camp. And I have a board at Marydale Faith and Life Center. And some of those board members were very concerned about the property and what would happen as we sisters continue to die off. So with the cooperation of the community and the board for Marydale Faith and Life Center, we looked into agencies, other institutes that might be able to help us. One of those members had a connection with Trust for Public Land. And so then we began the discussions with Trust for Public Land. Trust for Public Land said they were interested in us. They assigned us a lawyer from here, from New York. And then we met with the board. We met with the sisters. We prayed further on it. And we agreed that this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to protect the land. It would go, half of it would go to Nyack State Park. The other half would go to Rockland State Park. And the almost 10 acres that we kept ownership of would have the easement to protect it also in case this ministry falls apart, because we intended to protect all of the land, not just part of it. And the easement made it possible to protect all of the land. Was that clear?
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear. Thank you.
And Beth, for the FSPA community, what kind of background research was involved in coming to that decision to really devote these acres to educational purposes?
The FSPA in 2007 started a standing committee called Eco-Spirituality Committee. And as part of that, they had a staff member, which was a Sister Lucy Slinger, who was their ecological advocate. And her experience and knowledge about conservation and biology really brought opportunities to the forefront of what could be going on with the land that FSPA has. And through conversations for the last 15 years or so, FSPA has worked with local land trust experts, university professors, county and state officials to really understand what opportunities are out there, but also maybe where the gaps are for the region and how we could be part of that role of education in the Driftless region. And ultimately, the decisions had a combination of sustainability, which was environment, economics, and the social equity of what could this bring to people.
Sister Verónica, your community worked with a land trust to put some of your land into a conservation easement. Why did you decide to do that?
We decided to do that because we knew that we wanted to try to keep our ministry here at the center alive. And if we just protected all the acreage, we'd have to move out because the property wouldn't be ours anymore. So from the beginning, that was part of the discussion. How do we keep the ministry and ownership of these almost 10 acres? But how do we protect it in case after we are all gone, this ministry also dies? We were aware that then people could buy it and they could develop it, and all the wishes we had would go out the window. So we decided we would put an easement on it, and this easement protects it from being developed. Somebody may want to buy the property, like the Boy Scouts or something like that, who would do similar ministries that we are doing now, but it can never be sold for development. And that was a big thing for us. We did not want the land sold for development.
Good.
Beth, with FSPAs, from visiting and speaking with a number of the sisters, it sounded like there was a conversation and an exploration at one point of looking about creating an easement at St. Joseph Ridge. but they've opted not to at this point. What kind of was involved in that discussion, and what led them right now to say that an easement isn't right for them, and how does that kind of differ also with different ways of preserving land? So how does an easement differ from the ecological projects that are happening?
Right. So at the time when FSPA was exploring what to do with the land in their care, in Wisconsin, conservation easements were really focused on being able to make it open access. And the property that is held right now is the backyard of sisters that live in the Villa building. And there was a lot of prayer and reflection to think of future land uses. And they decided, because the open access to the public for our specific state and region also included hunting, that really wasn't where they were at. The sisters were not ready to put it into an easement with the Mississippi Valley Conservancy land trust. That's our local land trust. So instead, they decided to use a focus of education, which has been one of their major ministries for years, and really kind of slowly control the access to the land. It's still held privately, and bring in more of the decision makers over time, so that if younger sisters felt that there was future land use needs to be met through ministries, that they could be part of that conversation. And it's been a little bit of a process, and every decade, I would say, things are changing. But at the time, with all the decision making, it was not something the sisters were ready for.
Mhm. That's interesting, Beth. You used the word process. I was actually touching on my next question for both of you. Beth, you could go first if you want, but what recommendations would you have for other religious communities or other organizations that would like to leave their land as a legacy, as you both have done?
The process for FSPA is one in which it's been part of the congregational process that women religious have been using for decades and centuries. But what FSPA did was really look at in-house resources and goals, and they knew that they had ecological advocate that could really come into research and figure out what it was that they could do with the land. And then they went through what would be their traditional congregational process to have proposals passed and have the land protected. But what worked well for FSPA, I think, is that when they chose education, which is a continuation of their ministry, as a goal, they also have now aligned this opportunity with the Laudato Si Action Platform and ecological education. That's one of the major goals of Laudato Si. So now the collaborative efforts are able to move with the times, and the process in which they started has continued to evolve. So we're looking at what other opportunities there are with our collaborative partners, state and local officials. We're researching USDA grants. We're looking at what infrastructure needs our collaborative partners need, whether it's water or parking. There's just a lot of things that are happening. And if we didn't take the time to think about it, I don't think we would have as many open opportunities as we do now for others.
Good. Sister Verónica.
I would say ask all the questions that pop into your head, and then ask even those that did not pop into your head. You cannot ask enough questions. I gave you 2 examples. Here in the property, as I was talking with the lawyer from Trust for Public Land, I thought our property went where the tree line is. After it was all done and the papers were signed, I realized we did not have 10 acres, and the line doesn't, I thought it went straight, but my straight was not their straight. And so we lost a lot of land that I did not want not acres, feet, that I did not want to lose. So that's 1. 2, part of our property went up the side of the mountain, and one of the things that the Friends of Hook Mountain wanted to do was have an alternative hiking path that went from the beach and met the long trail here in New York. I was delighted. If you're here in the area, I will love to hike that trail with you. It is beautiful. What I did not realize was that all the deer that used to be there were displaced, and now they're on our 10 acres. And so part of what we have to do now is pick up deer poop before our people come to do whatever they're going to do here. We also used to have turkeys that came to us every year. Turkeys have not come back, but the coyotes have. We had a group of 8 coyotes in front of one of our cabins. And again, I just looked at that and I said, I didn't ask that question. So ask questions, take the time to read, to ask, to research, to ponder, to dream, to imagine the good and not so good till you can see your way clear to where the Lord is leading your community.
That's great. So we've had a few questions come through on the chat. Chris and I have a few more on our own, but we'll jump over there for a little bit. One of the questions that someone had asked was, I'll throw this to you, Sister Verónica. Can you explain just kind of how you got an easement? So how did that even come about? Who did you talk to? What were the steps that you went through to make that happen? And maybe even before answering that, like, just kind of quickly define what an easement is, in case some of our audience might not be familiar with the term.
Yeah, and an easement, as I understand it for us, is the limitations that we willingly put on this property. So we cannot build on it anymore. We agreed that the buildings that we have on it, we're not going to add to those buildings, and we're not going to make those buildings any bigger than they are. And part of that easement is that this land cannot be sold for development. So I think an easement allows you to make the restrictions you want and to aim it in the direction of the future that you're hoping for that part of the property. So the property is ours. And the Friends of Hook Mountain we really should be paying for that easement. You have to pay upkeep on this easement. But the Friends of Hook Mountain was so eager that we do have this easement that they take care of that. So my community doesn't have to pay for the easement. But again, as I look at our beautiful mountain and I look at where our cabins stand, and I say, how many years do we, sisters who are left, have? It's a great relief to me that this property is sacred. It's not going to be sold for development.
Mhm, mhm.
If I may, there's also in Wisconsin, there's 2 different types of easements. There's conservation easements, and then there's farmland easements, in which if you're farming, which 92 acres of FSPA land is still being farmed by an organic farmer, there's all these players and things to consider of the type of easement that you want for that property.
I'll point out really quickly here that Beth is a board member, is that right, of the Mississippi Valley Land Conservancy. So while FSPA hasn't officially gone through the process of establishing an easement at this point, they have a great resource of someone who understands kind of the nuts and bolts and what you can do and what you can't. I think one thing to point out too is with different states, the terms and kind of the limitations or the expectations with land trusts, with easements, they can differ. So it's really important to kind of look at what's available in your local area as part of your decision-making process.
Mhm. I have 2 questions here. And I just want to say, I want to affirm it is beautiful, the area that Sister Verónica is talking about. And I look forward to maybe a hike in the fall on or near the property. Not far from the Hudson River. One question for Sister Verónica: what is the full name of the public land resource group you worked with? And then a question for both of you, an interesting question: are your mineral rights protected? That's a very interesting question. But yeah, Sister Verónica first, the name of the resource.
Yeah, it's Land for Public Trust. That's the name of the entity which we made the contract, and they worked. at putting together and raising the $3 million that we were asking for the 30 acres that we were going to donate to New York State. The mineral rights, Chris, you just brought up another question I didn't ask. I know nothing about our mineral rights or what happens to it, and nobody brought it up.
Nobody brought it up. Okay.
Yeah, Trust
Interesting.
Public Land didn't. Other people who are concerned about conservation, that's very interesting that not one of us did that pop into.
Interesting. Beth, any thoughts on mineral rights?
Yeah, that's a great question that I don't know, but I should, because there's been so many issues in the Mississippi River watershed with regards to frac sand mining. I do know that we're looking into what it is for wind rights, because we're on a ridge top and there could be opportunities for turbines in the future. But that's a really great question that I don't know where we're at with that.
Okay. One question for Sister Verónica, and I think we've talked about this some, but it bears repeating perhaps. What was the most challenging part of protecting the land, and what is the most rewarding part for what the congregation has done? It's challenging and most rewarding.
I think challenging was getting everyone on board. For me, working with Trust for Public Land was a very positive experience because of the young lawyer, Ben Weiland, that they assigned to us. He was a really great guy. He's no longer here in the New York area. But he explained to me that the process was to get everybody on board, and it was like making a quilt. You donate this much, you donate that much, you so forth. So he talked with the village, he talked with Clarkstown, he talked with New York State, you know, and of course, Trust for Public Land is a part of it. And part of what you do with Trust for Public Land is whatever money you get, you do make a donation to them. I did try to find out exactly how much, but it got lost somewhere. I'm still looking. But that was challenging, knowing that you know, somebody could pull out and the whole thing would fall apart. And then our beautiful property, which is no longer mowed, now it's going back to trees and all of that, is right by Nyack State Park, which needs parking. And I looked at the village and I said, if you're going to make this parking space, I quit. That's a deal breaker. We will not go for the conservation. But happily, the village was on the same page as I was. And they were very happy that we were making that requirement, that this property cannot be another parking lot. So that was the most challenging part. I think the rewarding part is that those of us, few of my sisters who still live here, we look at this property and sense the presence of God every day. And we know that the finches and the hawks and the deer, God bless them, who will not let anything I plant grow. You know, Rockland County is being developed so quickly. The traffic up here, Chris, now is almost as bad as the city. So this is a spot for somebody to stand here and know there's somebody far greater than us who loves us and gives us this kind of beauty.
Right.
Beth, let's throw the same questions to you on behalf of the FSPA's. Kind of what has been most challenging for them and kind of protecting the land, and for you, what's been most rewarding from the process, especially the work that you're doing as the internal ecology director?
Sure. I think, you know, when I get to talk with sisters and learn the history, I think one of the most challenging pieces has been to not be consumed by people first, and that this is nature's home, and what we might think is best for us might not be best for our brothers and sisters that are living there all the time. I think that there has been a real opportunity to build relationships with state, federal, and county officials. I think there's been a lot of information shared back and forth. There was a long process in which the sisters went through in order to get a small portion of the land designated a natural burial site with the county. And I don't think that was an easy process. And there are stories that one of the sisters that wanted to be buried there just kind of held out as long as she could, because there's a lot of back and forth and conversation and a lot of questions to ask, just like Sister Verónica said. For me, I think one of the most rewarding pieces of being able to work with and for FSPA is that the dynamic is constantly changing. And while there's a lot of stakeholders, whether sisters, affiliates, staff, and visitors that come out to the hermitages as part of the Spirituality Center experience, there's an opportunity for everyone and everything. I think that the space itself has a beautiful touch any season, and it's not just 4 seasons. And we're really trying to meet a wide variety of people with an educational experience and a spiritual experience that I like to say some of our stakeholders are between 9 and 99. It's just a lot of different people that want to come out and enjoy this space. So we're working on opening those doors and figuring out ways to do it collaboratively.
I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit, just because to help maybe some people understand kind of what are these ecological projects like, and especially maybe as an alternative for other communities that might not be ready yet to pursue a full easement. What does it look like? How is the land being used, in especially on educational reins?
Sure. As Sister Verónica alluded to, it's kind of a patchwork. You know, there's a lot of people and places that have to come in. So FSPA has started a collaborative educational sustainability project that is the result of the 2 chapter proposals from 2013 and 2017 to set the land aside and make it available for education with a sustainability and regenerative focus. So right now, FSPA has a natural burial site on these 200 acres of land. We're in contract with an organic farmer who is doing very innovative ag, crimping rye when he has drilled in soybeans. We have hiking trails that are available for elementary students to come out and visit. We had Boys and Girls Club, 4-H clubs come and work with us over the summer, as well as UWL art class looking at landscape. So we're really trying to find an opportunity. If someone has a need for a space, we can try and help meet that need. And we have an organic garden and a greenhouse. There are just phenomenal spaces in which we try to have more of that hands-on experience. And with the greenhouse, yes, it's cold in Wisconsin in the winter, but we can still try and have some interactions with folks looking at what it is to kind of even do garden prep in February, when you know you can't get a single seed in the ground until April. It's cold, but not that cold. And I think that the other thing with regards to the future of what they want to do with restorative ag, soil rehabilitation, and just putting bits and pieces back into natural landscapes, whether it's oak savanna or prairie, we're not going to be the experts, but we're going to work with people that can help us build that in, and that we can help tell that story just like this with other religious congregations and other folks in Wisconsin and the Driftless region.
Just really quickly, someone asked how many acres FSPA land is again. Could you say that?
It's 200 acres total, and we have 92 acres right now in rental with an organic farmer. 92 of the 200.
I have 2 questions in front of me. One is very short and one is long. So I'm going to give them both to you. One is from Gail DeJours, our editor at Global Sisters.
I know Chris might have froze. I can jump in.
Yeah, very short
back?
question. But yeah, but here's a longer question, which is very, very interesting. Hold on one sec. I always get a little instability about an hour into these things, but I think I'm okay now. as Sister Veronica alluded to, conservation easements protect the land from development, but still mean the land can be sold as long as the new stewards uphold the rules of the easement. Many people who wish to do regenerative stewardship or education, especially Black and Indigenous folks and other people of color, have trouble gaining access to land to work on. 98% of land, assuming in the U.S., is owned by whites. Have you given thought to who the next generation of stewards might be? Yeah, so please.
Okay. Yes and no. No, because we hope that the ministry here at Marydale Faith and Life Center, which is open and welcoming to everybody, is going to continue beyond us. But again, being realistic and realizing that that may not happen, we put the easement on it. Now, that is another question I did not ask. Who's going to be the next generation, as you say, if the ministry at the center dies? You know, I don't expect that I will be around, so I don't know, and we really did not think about that. Our thoughts went as far as if the ministry dies and no one comes forward that really wants to work this area for a ministry and not for development, we have provided funds for everything to be torn down, and the land will go back to its natural state. But what other group might come, whether they be indigenous peoples, and we do have quite a few Lenape groups around still here that, you know, I don't know if they would be interested. We have a big Haitian community in Rockland County, and of course we have big Latino, but whether they would be groups that even have funds that could do something with this property, I'm not sure. So to get to the point, our thoughts went as far as, if nobody comes forward, what do? We tear everything down and we let the property go back to its natural state.
Sure.
Chris,
Beth,
I
any
think you've got-
response?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Brian. No, I was just gonna say, Beth, any response?
Right. So with the Collaborative Educational Sustainability Project of FSPA, ultimately the goal is to restore the land to its maybe the last 400 or 500 years restoration. But that's part of our education, is actually building who and what people know about the property and are able to become stewards, you know, in partnership with us, in relationship with us right now. And one of the things that we're working on that is, it's still very brand new, but looking at specific plots of land that are easily accessible. And I alluded to infrastructure a little bit before, you know, water access, but parking access, to give an opportunity to folks to come and grow their own food, and looking at what relationships are in the driftless region for communities that might not have land access, that might not have even commuter access. So fortunately, there is a bus line. It's very infrequent, but you know, all of these stakeholder conversations of, okay, it's great to open up the land, but then what? And how do we build that relationship, teaching people to grow if they don't know how to grow it? And can we give them a space to be part of their own community and cultures? But I from what I know with FSPA, you know, if we're talking 100, 200 years from now, is to really have that land restored over time. So there's going to be segments of it, and looking at the natural prairie and oak savanna and just what it means to have that restored and brought back to nature.
And something I learned from speaking with a number of congregations is, when you say like restoring the land to its natural state, that does not necessarily mean just leaving the land alone and having nothing to do with it. There's a lot of cultivating and kind of replanting of natural grasses and things like that that go along with it as well. So there's still an active process with that. I think, Chris, the first question that you're asking, I think you got cut off, so I'll raise it again. Someone wanted to know, can the terms of an easement change? So I guess once you've established an easement, can you or a future owner of the land tweak those in some way?
You can, but it's really hard to do. I think you need to have that lots of legal power in order to do that.
Yeah, and I want to say no, but you know, forever is never forever, really. So I have a neighbor who supposedly was not supposed to build a road on his part of the property without our agreement, and yet down the years he built a road, and the village allowed him to. So you know, we will. Oh, wait a minute! I thought he couldn't build that road unless we agreed to also. So I think you have to be careful. And though the Friends of Hook Mountain pay for our easement, we're the ones who watch over the easement that it be kept. My question is going to be, what happens when we're gone? Who's going to be the watching person? That the easement be kept and not broken.
My understanding, it seems like a lot of these land trusts or conservancies, they're the ones that are overseeing and kind of ensuring that the terms of the easement are kept to. So there's annual checks that are involved with that. Sometimes some of the fees that are associated with establishing an easement go towards kind of ensuring that there's a pot of money in case there needs to be litigation of enforcement with some of these issues. And I will point out, so when I was speaking with the Sisters of St. Francis of Rochester, Minnesota, I think there's one or two representatives here, when they were going through the process with their lawyer kind of how to establish an easement for their land. I believe one of their lawyers said that the law doesn't like many things forever, but easements is one of the areas right now where it's still the case. So it sounds like it's very difficult to try to overturn the terms. That's why it's important, I guess, to really know what you're doing and what you want to do at the beginning of it, and then ensuring that there's these groups that can uphold them for as long as possible.
There was another question of did either of you look into working with the Nature Conservancy? They've preserved some key properties in South Florida and on the eastern shore of Maryland. Did you look into working with them at all?
We did. We looked into a number of them. Their names escape my mind now, but Nature Conservancy was one of them. And they were not interested in us. I forget if they were the ones that weren't interested in us because our property no longer sat right on the Hudson. We're like an acre behind it. Mm-hmm. And this is why we were blessed in having this board member that did have a connection with Trust for Public Land, because Trust for Public Land would not have been interested in us either, because we don't have tons of acres. They would be very interested with with Beth and her community, but 30 acres is not what they normally go after to protect. But the person on our board that had that contact was able to convince them of how important this was for the ecology of the area, for the health of the Hudson River, and you know, for just this part of the world. Otherwise, we would still be looking for somebody that would partner with us to protect this land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beth, anything?
My knowledge, TNC, Nature Conservancy, was not part of the conversation. However, I know that they occasionally do work with the local land trust, Mississippi Valley Conservancy. I think it was kept very local, looking at what the Wisconsin regs are. And that was at the time where the sisters just weren't ready. So I don't think they explored it much farther.
Okay. I think we've got just maybe one or two more questions from the chat. This is an interesting one. Can land be given to state park services to oversee property in the future?
I think that's what happened with ours. We sold it to land for public trust, but
Right.
they because we're right in the middle of what we sold. The eastern part of it they gave to Nyack New York State Park, and the western part of it they gave to Rockland State Park. And so now those acres of land belong to the parks, and they're there for people to hike in and enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
They also don't need much upkeep. You know, the parks have no intention to be mowing and clearing weeds or any of that. So if anybody wants to enjoy them, they have to enjoy them in their natural state.
Right, right. Beth, any response?
Well, and in regards to Wisconsin, it could be given to state park services, but you are at the mercy of the state budget and the legislature to be able to have that. And that would also mean if things need to be cut down, I mean, not cut down like trees, but, you know, culled or minimized with budgets, that property will be subject to that with the rest of them. And in today's toxic political world, sometimes you don't know, you really don't know. So I think that there is an advantage with some of these nonprofits, local land trusts. Again, in Wisconsin, we work with Mississippi Valley Conservancy, and the state agency or state nonprofit is Gathering Waters. And they have been tremendous help guiding us in other ways with our conservation management plan for the land.
So here's a question that just came in, a little challenging one. So this person says that land is holy. So do you think that an easement can potentially cause depression or division among members in a community or congregation?
I don't know if I can answer that coming from my tiny community. We're down to 11. We were about 15, 16 when we were talking about these things. And it is precisely because the land is holy that we put the easement on it. So for us, it was not an item that caused division. On the contrary, it brought us closer together. We were all happy that all of our property, not just the ones we gave to Trust for Public Land, all of our property is protected.
And with FSPA in mind, I think, you know, this at the time the sisters weren't ready for an easement because there was a lot of cultural, historical connections for the congregation to this piece of land in which they used it to sustain themselves early on and start the hospital. So it is a sacred place in many ways, and that's where it's still a part of a conversation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sure.
A question I've had that I saw from just kind of people reacting to the story and stuff is, why was this the best way to go? Why is land preservation the way? Some people were like asking, couldn't this land be used for developing housing or something like that? Is there another way to utilize this land? In both cases, what was the importance of conservation in this particular case?
You know, my sisters would not argue that building on this property for the poor would have been a very good thing to do. But I don't think we would have been able to do it. We would have had to fight Upper Nyack, New York State, Clarkstown. And we might all be dead by the time the first brick got in the ground for some poor people to live with. So we felt that what we could do and did want to do was to at least preserve this land, to keep it from being developed, and therefore everybody, especially the poor, can come and enjoy it, because it is state land now and it is open to everybody. The other, though, the providing housing for the poor is an eminently important conversation that needs to be had with those religious communities that have both the land and the means by which to try to provide such a service.
And the 200 acres of land outside of La Crosse, Wisconsin, that FSPA has in their care has been a real diamond in the rough when it comes to the intense conventional agriculture of this region and the breadbasket that the region likes to claim as part of the upper Midwest. So conserving the land and taking time and effort and resources to really conserve it. It is not something in which you just leave the woodland and let it grow. You have to actively work with the property, with the trees, with the weather. You know, we're having rain events that are in some ways very catastrophic and cutting down big ravines of our blufflands, and, you know, looking at conservation and what we can do collectively, even with our farmer renter, you know, putting in cover crops to slow the pace of that water down so it doesn't disrupt the farmlands that is someone's livelihood downstream. It's kind of that big picture of where do we fall in place right now, and also what can we do to teach and help others grow so that we can have that symbiotic relationship that's a little more integral for both people and planet.
And I can add that in the congregations I spoke with, some of them had already at some point either donated land or sold lands for the sake of development for the poor or for other things that were in line with their ministry. But they came to the point as well where it was important to also include conservation and land preservation as part of that as well. So we are getting short on time. So I will pose one final question to both of you. Pope Francis has called the world to an ecological conversion. What would you like others to learn from your witness or from the witness of your community that it's offering through the decisions about land conservation and how to best use and protect land? So, Beth, do you want to start?
I think what folks can learn is the example is it meets you where you are, where FSPA has been, and the invitation to be part of something more, I think, is something that FSPA recognizes, and they're looking at an opportunity to just share that story and build relationships, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting like this.
I think going through this process between the praying and the discussing and the studying and all of that brings you back to who we're supposed to be. My community spirituality has a big hue of Ignatian influence. And Ignatius, as you know, Francis is one of his sons. Ignatius calls us in what he calls the principle and foundation to be who we're supposed to be. And if we are, then we are aware that all of God's creation is meant to bring us to God. Therefore, we are supposed to use all of these gifts in as much as they bring us to God, and in as much as they get in the way of bringing us to God, we have to have the freedom to let them go. I think where our religious communities are now, and in the process of discernment that they're making, we are reaching to be who we're supposed to be. We have used this property for the glory of God, and now we let it go for the glory of God.
So that's a wonderful, wonderful summation, both of you. But those last words, Sister Verónica, are very, very moving. Thank you for that. So we're wrapping up. Want to thank both Sister Verónica and Beth for joining us today and sharing your experiences. We'd also like to thank our colleagues at Global Sisters Report, EarthBeat, and National Catholic Reporter, especially those who are helping behind the scenes. You haven't seen their work, but they've made it all possible. So we thank everyone. And we want to refer people to the stories, the 4-part series, An Estate Plan for the Earth, that began this week on EarthBeat and Global Sister Report websites. I do want to say just briefly, the profiles of the different congregations. There's a common story in all of these narratives that Brian and I have produced, but there are some interesting differences, and I think those are worth looking at. I know in my case in the Hudson Valley, the Maryknoll sisters have had to deal with the issue of wetlands, and so someone brought up the issue of wetlands. So there's some intriguing, very interesting differences between the different experiences. So I urge you all to read the stories and get a fuller picture of what we're talking about.
I'll echo Chris on that, absolutely. And just add as well, so we were only able to kind of speak with so many congregations for this particular series. We know that there's a lot more going out there, even some that we spoke with ourselves that we weren't able to include fully or delve into, but this is definitely an active area, it seems like, for a lot of congregations. And I think just the participation interest today reflects that as well. So as we mentioned earlier, next week, you'll receive an email follow-up about today. We'll include a link to the recording of the session, as well as the prayers and the resources that were spoken about. We couldn't get to everyone's questions. I know I had more myself. I'm sure Chris did as well. But we thank everyone for their participation and their patience. And again, the resources will include some of those questions as well. So we'll thank you again for participating in today's session. And we're grateful that everyone could gather here online. Sister Verónica and Beth, special thank you to both of you for being here and for sharing your thoughts with us. It's been great to learn more about Women Religious, this entire process for Chris and I, and how they're continuing their decades of efforts for caring for creation. So Beth, would you be able to lead us in a final prayer?
Yes, I have a prayer for our earth from Laudato Si. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey toward your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Beth. Thank you for that moving prayer. And we're done. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. It was a pleasure to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It was fun.